organizations should be focusing on long-term behavior changes. And that only happens when a couple things happen. One is that you have the approach and the strategy to how you're going to deliver that content. And it also comes back to modeling the way, and that the leaders of those individuals are demonstrating those behaviors, reinforcing them, and even pointing them out when someone's demonstrating them effectively, and also pointing them out when they're not, and then reminding them why they're important.
Larry, it is so good to have you on our podcast today. I would love to kick things off by just starting. I know that leadership is really important and is something that you've really focused on both in your work as a coach professionally and throughout your podcast content that you're sharing. You know, leadership has changed a lot over the last, 100 years, the last 50 years, even the last 5 years, as we've shifted from predominantly in-person situations where a lot of folks get face time with either office leaders, headquarter leaders, their managers, or their team leaders, to a much more hybrid or even fully remote work environment. So how do you think, or do you think leadership is changing as we move into these different remote situations?
Right. So the answer is yes. It absolutely has changed. And a lot of it has to do with this world that we have collectively entered. It's always been around, but it is like 5x right now. So we could talk about the pandemic and the sedimentation of the pandemic, but at the end of the day, you need to have sharper and stronger acumen around what I and others call human skills, humanistic skills, power skills. We used to call them interpersonal skills. I do not like the term soft skills, because at the end of the day, we all know that they are the hardest things for people to build acumen and muscle around. So I never call them soft skills. And I'm bold enough in a very respectful way to help reframe that in conversation with people and say, hey, let's maybe not call it soft skills, because it's usually where people really trip up, right? So, and I think it undervalues the importance of these skills. Now, the reason they've become more important, in addition to the landscape of the workplace where people are maybe functioning more hybrid or completely remote, has as much to do with the pace of change. So I talk a lot about in presentations I do in and outside of the company about a very well-known management framework that emanated in the late 1980s called VUCA. So VUCA stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it emanated from a couple futurists back in the 1980s, and it was absorbed into the military very quickly because it did a very good job explaining the environment of those types of conditions, right, that military experiences. And then it was moved into the financial spaces, like a business lexicon, in the late 2000s due to some financial situations that we experienced. And then you heard about VUCA, but not as significantly until the pandemic. And it really explained what probably we most universally experienced as a society at the same time, right? Universal, obviously, meaning that things are changing, things are volatile. We don't know, it's moving at a very fast pace. We don't have the answers. There's various things happening at the same time, and there's a lot of confusion as a result. And I would say that there's very few people that wouldn't tell you that that's a very good definition of what it felt like from 2020 even until today. So the reason that's important, getting back to your question, is that the types of skills that you have to build as a leader are different than they were even 5 years ago. Skills around relating to people, um, uh, the ability to have a vision, the ability to articulate that vision, and all the other important attributes that we often talk about, whether it's through formal training or whatever means to build those skills, they've become increasingly important, especially the idea of tuning into people and being clear about what you know and what you don't know. And it's more important today for leaders to be okay to say, I don't have all the answers, but together we need to figure it out. So tell me what you're thinking. That's a very big part of some of the new skills. Like you have to expand your network. You can't just rely on one or two people to give you information because no one has all the answers.
I would love it if you could share an example of how leadership is changing, from what you would have given as an example of a strong or a critical skill in leadership pre-pandemic versus post-pandemic. So where are some of those skills shifting, and what are some examples, and what is an example you would have given before, and what is like the example today?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's a fair question. And I don't know that I'm going to kind of reframe it. When my answer would have probably been the same, but I would triple click on the attributes. Okay. And I'm going to tell you what I usually talk about to people. If someone says to me, how can I be a more effective leader today? One of the first things I'm going to suggest to them is don't force it. Don't be performative. Focus on transformational kind of behavior. So sometimes I'll say more transformative and less performative, because performative comes off as fake, disingenuous. So I'll tell people to focus on these three things. I actually call them the 3 C's. So people remember them. It's a nice little hook type formula. I say the first thing you have to do is care about people. If you don't care about people, you need to get out of the leadership business. And what that means for me is when you care about others, you show some degree of interest, a reasonable degree of interest in other people and for their welfare. It means that you're interested in what they're thinking about. And yes, I'm going to say it, what they're feeling. There's nothing wrong with that. We have to tune into the whole person. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? It means really just caring about people at a very human level. The second C for me is to connect. And you have to care first to connect, right? But when I mean connecting is you're pretty much taking the caring to this actionable level. And I will say this often, your primary job as a leader is to create the conditions for others' success, right? So that's the third C. But a little more about the connection that I just referenced, and that is you got to take the time to, again, figure out what they're thinking, find out what their interests are. It doesn't mean that you have to go, 10 feet into their personal life, but you do have to realize today, and this is where those lines blur again, even more so post-pandemic, where, people do literally bring their whole selves to work. We can't chop it up and say, don't bring your life experiences into work, because whether we want it or not, it's what they bring into through the door or through the screen. And the quicker we realize that's just a reality, the less we fight this kind of old school thought of just do the job and collect the paycheck. And I'm not really worried or care about you. That just doesn't work anymore. And it's such an erosive, terrible message. And when leaders do demonstrate this interest in by caring about people and then taking it to this next level of connecting with people, they start to relate. And if you don't relate to people, how are they going to follow you? How are are people going to care about your vision if they think you don't even care about them? And how are you going to figure out how to tap into people's skills and their abilities and their interest if you don't take the time to connect with them? So it's this almost like this self-limiting way of operating as a leader if you don't care about people and connect with them. And then again, that third C, I think, is pretty much a drop the mic attribute. And if you as a leader do not take the time to literally create the conditions so that other people can be successful, you will be leading yourself and only yourself.
I'm curious, with your background in coaching, I'm sure that you've worked with clients and with friends and with colleagues around these 3 C's. Do you have any tips for someone who's listening and working on their own leadership journey around reflection questions or things that they can ask themselves at the beginning or the end of their work week to check in on, have I been practicing these 3 C's, or have I been practicing some part of these 3 C's?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of in the kind of quasi formula I was just talking about. I mean, if I'm a leader at any level, you asked a really important question, and we didn't talk about this yet, but I think something a leader needs to do very actively is to take time to reflect. If you don't take time to reflect, you're not going to ask yourself about any of these things or any other important questions. So when you take the time to reflect, you need to check in with yourself and ask yourself, am I creating the time, creating the space to connect with people? You could just sit back and go through your calendar or in your mind's eye and play back the week and say, who did I connect with this week that I don't typically connect with, or that I do, that is on my team, but I know I haven't spoken to in a couple of weeks? You know what usually happens? And I've had this experience in my past where I felt like maybe a relationship with an individual was getting away from me. Now, we all have these things. It's that internal track in our head that's reminding us of something. But I think it's fair to say, and I place a bet on this one, that many people, leaders at all levels, don't pay attention to those indicators. So think about it as a dashboard. When that lights up and it says, oh, I haven't spoken to Bob in a couple of weeks, and I feel like I'm missing connection with him, do something about it and turn it into an action orientation. So I think that's really important. So am I taking the time? Like, who have I checked in with? And then I think another simple one, but really important one, is think about think about your team members and how they're executing on work. And then check in with yourself and them and see, have I asked Steve if there's any barriers I could remove to help him, be more successful? How are you doing, Steve? Is there something I could do to help you? Is there something I could do to help you? And then in addition to that, when people are struggling, don't wait to check in and say, why? Why are you struggling? What do you think is getting in your way, and how can I help you? I think those are important things to consider.
And a lot of that has to do with how you're approaching it as a leader. Are you dropping work on someone's plate and walking away and leaving them alone to navigate it? Or are you creating conditions for success? Are you cheering them on as they take on the new work, even if they can take it on and they do have the skills? Are you acknowledging that? And if they don't have the skills, if it is a stretch assignment, are you checking in? Are you providing the support you need? Are you clearing the way, just like you said, creating those conditions for success?
Yeah, great recap, Ashley. Nothing feels worse. So play that out one step further. You did a little more dumping than delegating, and you're not checking in. So imagine everything we just talked about that you should do and you don't do. Play that scenario out. And then an individual maybe they're struggling, and this time has elapsed. And instead of meeting them in real time to talk about meaningful course correction, like in the flow of the experience, how much erosion has taken place, right? And then what we forget is not only are they maybe not executing and succeeding in the work that we've given them, but the psychology of what happens to that person in terms of not feeling good about themselves, not feeling successful, not feeling like they're achieving, you start to actually impact their confidence. And then instead of getting exponential return and production and stellar work, the person starts to question and doubt themselves. Now imagine that person's in a leadership position, what effect then does that have on their team? Because if they're struggling as a leader, they are not going to be as available or as helpful for the people they're leading because they're in their own heads. And the space they're renting is not good space. And that's why this becomes really important. It's not, we have to keep reminding ourselves that when you're a leader, in addition to creating those conditions for success, leaders need to remember that they are always modeling for other people. The question leaders have to ask themselves is, how am I showing up? Am I modeling in a productive, healthy way?
I think that's absolutely true. And your point that everybody is a leader, if you are a manager and you have a team, you are by nature in a leadership position. You might be running a company and really be the leader of that organization. But as an individual contributor, you also have the opportunity to lead by example and bring in leadership qualities and attributes into your work. And that is equally important, I think.
Yeah, and I'll just one clarification. The way I look at this, and most people do, is that regardless of the management position, and this is important because management and leadership are two different things, but we need both in anyone who is leading people and is caring for people. So you might want to say that management, sometimes I'll say management is about position, leadership is about disposition. By textbook, management is about planning, organizing, task-related things. And leadership is about painting a picture of an optimistic or hopeful future. It's rallying a team around important work. And then again, clearing that path that we were talking about a few minutes ago. From an individual contributor level, sometimes like in the IO psychology world, we'll call them OCBs or organizational citizenship behaviors. And those are the behaviors that everyone should be demonstrating and building connective tissue around because it goes above and beyond just the job description, but it's what leads to a better outcome and a stronger culture in the organization.
Since many of our listeners are organizational leaders or people leaders in people teams at big companies, what are some things that are important to keep in mind as you think about building a talent profile, or not a talent profile, a training program or a culture around leadership? Like, what are the things that you can put into place to help build those leadership attributes at your organization?
Yeah, I think it's very much in line with what we've been talking about. Within an organization, there's usually some type of, whether we call them this or not, some type of competency model that everyone has bought into and everyone knows what, we're measuring people by in terms of behaviors. Sometimes we just call them behaviors. What's important is that we're clear on what they are and we're clear on explaining why they're important and how they tie the results. And then we're also doing something organizationally to set the stage to help people learn how to build those skills, whether it's formal, instructor-led training programs, micro videos where you're talking about these human skills that we're talking about, or experiential learning. A strong blended learning experience is really important to drive that type of sustainable development and growth within individuals, taking it to a place that is meaningful and not just, checking a lead indicator that we got a certain number of people in the room to consume this learning asset. But how do you change behavior? And organizations should be focusing on long-term behavior changes. And that only happens when a couple things happen. One is that you have the approach and the strategy to how you're going to deliver that content. And it also comes back to modeling the way, and that the leaders of those individuals are demonstrating those behaviors, reinforcing them, and even pointing them out when someone's demonstrating them effectively, and also pointing them out when they're not, and then reminding them why they're important. So those are, it's having the resources and the framework to build that acumen. It's having leaders support it, reinforce it, and model it. At a minimum, there's just the two very important. Consider it, the head side of the coin and the tail side of the coin.
Mm-hmm. And how would you measure the success of those programs? My thought initially is, would you send out pulse surveys to ask, do I feel like my manager or my leader is doing XYZ or makes me feel XYZ? Or are there specific questions? Are there specific methodologies? Are there ways for people teams to start testing and tracking how are my leadership training programs impacting our overall culture? And how can I track that progress over time?
Right. So you're testing me on my memory of the Kirkpatrick model, which is a learning model, which is like a pyramid. And there's, I think, 5 different levels. And one is, I enjoyed the program, right? And then it goes all the way up to, effectuating results. And, to be honest, the days of lead indicators just don't carry a lot of weight anymore. It's really about looking at results and results through behavior changes. And, if we're developing acumen around human skills and we've got the right formula and the right ingredients in our recipe, over time, we should see demonstrative behavior of people, becoming more successful in those behaviors. And if we're tracking, a trailing metric, I think it's a fair hypothesis that there should be an impact on engagement. There should also be an impact on the type of measures or KPIs, whether we call them KPIs, OKRs, and there are slight differences between all those, whatever, or role-based expectations. We should be able to see some type of meaningful impact on those data points if, in fact, that's what we're addressing, in the upfront in the delivery model around developing acumen in people in different dimensions.
That is really, really powerful. And so I think one of the things that anyone who is an aspiring leader can take away is in my goals, in my OKRs, in my SMART goals, whatever it is that you use as a framework, it's not just about your role and your competencies. You should put in some role-based or some leadership-based KPIs. Am I checking in with my team, each member of my team, at least every 2 weeks, just to connect with them? Or something that will help you measure, am I actually putting these habits into practice? Am I taking action around these leadership qualities and attributes that I want to be cultivating?
I think that's a great way of going about it. And the reality is there are some people that it just comes more naturally to, right? And this gets back into, are you born a leader, or do you, can you develop them? We all know the punchline is anyone, within reason, there are challenges. Someone might have a challenge that, gets in the way of that, but anyone can really become a better leader. It takes intentionality, it takes reflection, and it takes skill building. However, there are people that do have a more natural propensity to leader-like behavior. It could be the way they were raised. It could be that they were just, learned to be more empathetic, or they were naturally more curious. So those people you might suggest look more like natural leaders, but they too need to keep sharpening that iron, because you don't just become a great leader and stay there. I always tell people that it is not linear. It is not like climbing a mountain. It is more like an undulating, golf course. And by the time you get to the hole, there's 1,000 more in your leadership journey, right? So it's this ongoing thing. And that, the truth of it is too, you can consider yourself a very effective and proficient leader. And you can go through a really rough time that shakes your confidence. And you need to figure out how to get back on that horse. So the reality is, it is a non-stop, never-ending journey. We don't just get there and we don't stay there. We only ride that wave at like a higher level or footage, like a bigger wave, when we keep filling our tank. And it's all about intention. And when leaders realize that, not only are they better for themselves, it gets back to what we've both said probably 20 times. You model that for other people. So you show people that, you're not perfect. You're going to make mistakes. You don't have all the answers. But your job as a leader is to help people realize that, but then to figure it out, even in spite of those realities. Right? So, very important concept to absorb. And, again, that's just another reality that when leaders realize that, it also takes the pressure off them. Because a lot of times, especially new leaders, they think when they get promoted into a new position, they got to be lights out. What they got to realize is that you kind of just went back to the back of the line. And you got to figure out how to build that skill and you only do that by getting reps and becoming more confident. And over time, you get better. You have some bad days, bad experiences, but you keep developing confidence. And you could figure it out. And it's this continual process of learning. And I think we've said it in a few different ways here today, but that is one of the things that a leader at any level, or someone who thinks they want to become a leader, or I should say in a leadership position, because we also said everyone is a leader, at least of themselves. And you got to be a leader of you effectively before you're a leader of others. But one of the things that we all need to do to keep growing, literally, is to be open to learning. When we stop learning, you stop growing. When you stop growing, it's not sustainable, because you're going to have those bad days that rock you, those bad weeks, those bad months. And you have to realize that this growth thing isn't just when you hit those ruts. It's all the time. And it doesn't have to be big things. It could be a little thing, like taking time to reflect once a week. It could be taking time to, like you said, I love what you said, if it doesn't come to you, and this is how I went down this rabbit hole a little bit of, if it doesn't come natural to you, writing a goal for yourself about checking in with people is a really good idea. Over time, you keep developing that habit. Maybe it doesn't need to be a goal. It just becomes part of your tapestry as a leader. But whatever you need to do to get there and connect with people more effectively and care about people and create those conditions, it all comes back, I think, to those. For me, I just, literally created that construct in talking to you today around these 3 C's. But I think they're that important. I talk about them all the time. I just never called them the 3 C's until you and I started talking today. But to me, there are 3 C's: care, connect, create. It's like, I can remember that. Now there's 50 other or 20 other or whatever your number is of what are the leadership attributes you need to demonstrate. I would say whatever those others are, if you could do these 3 things effectively, you have an amazing foundation as a leader at any level, or as an emerging leader on your journey to become a leader of others in an organization.
I love that. I've become a really big fan of the 3 C's as we've been talking about them: care, connect, create success, create conditions for success. Yeah. They're fantastic. Yeah. And I love this vision you created, this reminder that being a leader or doing anything in your life, it is a learning journey. You have to be curious. You have to continue to be learning new things. And that you're not going to just have that, straight up a mountain success. It's not going to be linear. It is going to have dips and, valleys like a golf course. You're going to have holes. Actually, I don't play golf, so I can't come up with a good analogy here, but I do.
Well, then you got a bunker, right? You hit the sand trap and you got to try to get out of it, right? Mm-hmm. It's not easy.
Exactly. I am a mountain climber, and I think about it more around, it's not just going up to the top of the first peak. If you want to cross a mountain range, or if you want to go on a cross country road trip, it's not going to be smooth sailing at every point. Some parts are going to be more tricky than other parts. And so learning how to lead through easier times when you are in the groove and you're in flow and you can really quickly bring in new habits and level up is great. And then learning how to focus down on what's really critical in other trickier places of your life or in leadership or in your professional organization, whatever's happening, becomes really important to learn how to lead in both of those cases.
That's a great example and great summary. And Ashley, I know I just have to add this one more thing. I think it's really important. Post-pandemic, mental health is incredibly important. It's always been important, but it's more important than ever. Now, there's been a lot written about this in some very, popular journals and articles over the past few years. As a leader of others, you do not have to be a psychologist, and you should not be practicing psychology. But you do need to tune in to people's emotions and their feelings and know how to spot when someone's struggling, because there's probably more of it happening today, maybe than ever before. And there's been just so many reasons associated with that. I would argue that they've existed pre-pandemic. It's just that the pandemic forced us to look at things differently. But I do believe that when a leader takes the time to tune into other people, and I mean the whole person, and it goes back to those 3 C's, in particular the caring at that point, right? And the connection, that you really are a non-performative and more transformative leader when you take the time to tune into the whole person. I just think that's really important.
I think that is the perfect place to end and think about, how are we tuning into the whole person as an organization, as an individual in the work that we do. Thank you so much, Larry, for this conversation today.
Oh, it was my pleasure to be with you today and spend some time talking about a myriad of important topics like this.